Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody. Thank you for joining and taking time from your busy days to join this, the 20th edition of the FEZANA Talks. My name is Arzan Samwadia, and I'm the FEZANA president. FEZANA represents 27 Zoroastrian associations and 14 small groups across Canada and the United States, roughly representing 25,000 Zoroastrians in North America. The FEZANA Talks was a new digital initiative which we launched in 2020 to engage the Zoroastrian community in important dialogues and to showcase Zoroastrians and their work around the world, primarily in North America. If you want to stay updated with our future events, please follow us on social media on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter at the handle The FEZANA. You can also go to our website and sign up for our email updates. On today's talk, we welcome Khobad Ghandy, a legendary figure who has devoted his life to empowering oppressed communities in India. Kobad shall be in conversation with Porus P. Cooper. Porus is a veteran journalist who got his start at the Times of India in Bombay and most recently retired as a senior editor at the Philadelphia Inquirer. His freelance articles have been published in Parsi-Zoroastrian, the FEZANA Journal, and many other publications. He maintains an abiding interest in India and in the Zoroastrian community throughout the world. Through through media accounts, he has followed Khobad Ghandy and his work over the years. Porus is also a very dear friend and has been involved with FEZANA over the years in various ways and capacities and continues to lend his expertise, guidance, and mentorship to our public relations and communication strategy. A quick housekeeping rule, all questions shall be via the chat box, so please put your questions in there. And once we get to the question and answer portion of the talk, Porus and I will pose your questions to the crowd, to the audience, and Kobad and Porus can answer them. With that, I hand over to Porus.
Thank you, Arzan, and thank you all who have joined in here. Thank you, Fazana, for creating this valuable community platform. I would add to the request by Arzan as to audience questions. Please share them in the chat box as they occur to you, rather than wait until the end of the program when there will be time for a formally allotted time for audience questions. So anyway, today we have a unique guest. Safe to say that no previous guest of FEZANA Talks has served time in prison, let alone 10 years, and let alone on terrorism charges. Khobad Ghandy spent all that time in jails across India just awaiting trial. Bail was hard to get until a series of courts threw out those charges. Now, all that may be a commentary on the Indian judicial system, but the topic of immediate curiosity for us is how Khobad Ghandy, born into an affluent Parsi family, graduate of India's most expensive private boarding school, and headed for a lucrative career in finance, came anywhere near a jail, let alone inside one. Why did he exchange a coveted career as chartered accountant for communist activism? Why did he and his wife exchange the comforts of middle-class life to set up residence in one of the worst shanty towns in India? Kobad answers these questions, describes his life in prison, recollects how he rediscovered his own Zoroastrian heritage in prison, and shares his rethinking on communism in his newly published memoir, Fractured Freedom. The day of his arrest is a good starting point for our discussion, and I have requested Kobad to read the account back to us. Kobad, would you please?
Thank you, Porus, and thank you, Fezana, for inviting me for the show. I'll this book that I have just written and excerpt from it as and when the issues arise. But as Porus suggested, I'll read the first account of my arrest, or should I say, it was like a kidnap. It was 17th September 9, a day I shall never forget. It was 4 in the afternoon when I was standing at a bus stop below Bikaji Kama Place in Delhi. I had gone to the bustling business center with a friend to purchase computer material. I was waiting at the bus stop for a few minutes when an SUV pulled up, and about half a dozen toughs pounced on me, pushing me to the ground, and I struggled to free myself. As I struggled to free myself, they seized everything on me, dragged me to their car, and sped off. Little did I know that it was marked the beginning of a 10-year long journey of as an under trial throughout 7 jails in 5 states across the country. I was 62 years old and had come to Delhi from Mumbai for urgent medical attention for a serious prostate urinary problem as well as orthopedic and hypertension issues. The abduction was in fact an arrest. The charge that I was a member of the Bharatiya Janata Party of India Maoist, with the media widely propagating that I was supposedly one of its top leaders. Inside the car, they were speaking Telugu amongst themselves, while one questioned me in broken Hindi. From 4 in the afternoon to 3 o'clock the next morning, I was driven around the city with the occupants consistently talking to their bosses in Telugu on the phone they didn't understand. The word airport, though, kept cropping up. That's in English. The Andhra Pradesh Intelligence Bureau were known to fly people in helicopters to jungles in their state and bump them off and report that they had been killed in an encounter. I assumed this was the end, but at 3 in the morning, we reached a safe house with high walls where I was finally allowed a few hours of sleep.
Thank you. Thank you, Kobad.
How it started.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's start with the politics first.
Yeah.
In the preface of your book, you say, and I'm quoting you, though one expects arrest in our line of activity, given that I had not been arrested in the past 40 years, it did come as a shock. My question is, Kobad, why did you expect to be arrested in your line of work?
Well, India has a history of not so bad as it is now, but it's always been there of putting those who sincerely work for the people and specifically revolutionaries. And we were part of the Naxalite tradition of the 70s, early 70s. And, in 75, the emergency was declared. Of course, there the entire opposition was arrested, including Naxalites. And so the type of work, trade unionism amongst the Dalits, amongst the poor, generally people are at least arrested in the course of their activities, if not for their ideas. So, but I was never arrested. My wife was arrested on a few occasions while in the course of a trade union activity, but of course released soon after. So it's in this atmosphere that one expected to be arrested, but the fact is that we were never arrested in these 40 years of activity because all our work really is legal. But for the rulers here, that doesn't mean much. Working for the poor can itself be put as a crime.
The key word here seems to be Naxalite.
Yeah.
And that's a word that strikes fear in the hearts of many Indians because thinking back to the late 60s, early 70s, when that movement came to people's attention, it was regarded as a violent movement. In what way were you sort of entangled with it? Were they working, or shall we say, present side by side with you as you and your wife were organizing labor, for example? What exactly is this Naxalite?
Actually, that's a misconception created by the media. There are certain violent groups. I mean, just now, if you go to the website, there are 30 Naxalite groups in India. Even this present farmers' agitation has some of them leading them, which is very peaceful, very non-violent. You have many groups that are doing a lot of trade union work and sorts of legal activities. So there are. It's the Naxalite means a Marxist ideology outside the framework of the parliamentary two major parties, CPI and CPM. That's all it really means. And people have, most of the groups have been functioning legally. Some have been participating in elections, like one just in Bihar, 112 seats are there in the present elections. It's called the Liberation Group. But they're also a Naxalite group because they have the similar ideology. So it's a misconception created, and because basically it's these people who don't really compromise with the state, they're not corrupt, they don't give into the money and things like that, which is a normal thing to bribe people and get them into the what they call the mainstream. They are treated as a threat. So it is a misconception to say that they are basically violent, because in fact the bulk of the groups today are not in that fo- format. And in fact, the group that I was associated with when I came to Bombay from London was one such. It had a lot of trade union work, it had a lot of such work. Of course, then we shifted many groups at that time. And then we've been on the fringes since the 90s. That's basically it.
I see.
But the ideology is for socialism. Yes.
Kobad, for the benefit of this audience, most of us do not live in India, and some may not
Yes.
even be Indian. Please briefly describe the range of communist parties in India and where on this spectrum did you belong? Though I think you sort of answered that question with your last remark that you were on the fringes. But if you can be a little bit more specific as to the general topography of communism in India.
Yeah. Well, India has had the CPI, the Communist Party of India, which was there founded in 1920s. It had a history of fighting the British along with the Congress. It had quite a resilient history actually in the freedom movement. And when it came to power, when the Congress came to power, it's the first legally formed electoral government in the world was communist in Kerala. Of course, that was arbitrarily dismissed by the Nehru government then within a year. And but that CPI had come to power then. After that, in '64, based on the that's the problem with the Indian communist movement. That goes more according to what Soviet Union and China do. When the Soviet Union China split took place in the communist movement, so it happened in India too. And the CP in '64, the CPM was formed, Communist Party of India, Marxist. Now, after that, it is the CPIM, Marxist Party, that has been more of a strength in India, while the CPI has been a sort of additional force, but very weak all over the country. The CPM has had three communist governments in West Bengal, Jyoti Basu's government for nearly 30 years, the Tripura government also for, I think, about 15 to 20 years, and the Kerala government, which is now in power also. The CPM is now in power in Kerala. They switched from the CPM to Congress to CPM. So that was there. Now in '67, when the Chinese Revolution and the Cultural Revolution was taking place in China, all over the world, there was what was called the Maoist sort of upsurge worldwide. And it was at that time that I was in Britain. And I came in touch with these people, and the Naxalite uprising took place. Naxalite comes from the word Naxalbari. It's a small village in West Bengal. And that there was a small peasant revolt, and that was crushed brutally by the then Congress government. And after that, the a party was formed, and the entire elite students of Calcutta, Presidency College and Jadavpur University, really were supportive of this movement. That created a furor throughout the country and worldwide at that time because such students. But again, that was brutally crushed. They say students were lined up against a wall and shot by the then Siddharth Ray government. So that movement collapsed. The leader also was killed or died in jail, and that withered off. But then it revived again and into various factions. That's when the Andhra Pradesh also was a center after its revival in the '70s. And so we have the CPI and the CPM, which are the parliamentary parties. we have some of the Naxalite groups like the Liberation Group, which is also which won the maximum number of seats of the communists this time in the Bihar elections, but it's still treated as a Naxal group, the Liberation, because it follows the Maoist ideology. And then you have a whole spectrum of Naxalite groups. Some, that red corridor, which was said was led by the PWG and MCC, that's the armed groups, basically, stretching from Nepal to the south. That is only one of the sections. Otherwise, there are various groups like the even they say many of the present Kisan unions that are leading that belong to one or some of the other groups, which are all for peaceful struggle. So you have a wide spectrum of Maoist groups, which are some are in the parliament, some are in armed struggle, some and many are in between somewhere, just in building up trade unions and mass movements.
And
And
what part of what which of those factions would you say you were most closely associated with?
well,
Uh,
we were closely associated at the beginning with some of the armed factions, but we ourselves were involved in legal work out here that appealed to us then. But then after that, we were more on the fringes of the
why would
movement.
you be why would you associate yourself with an armed faction? What was the
Actually,
uh,
the thing was that Indian rulers, after the brutal revolution in 1972, where the students were just lined up on the wall and killed, it looked like at that period that there was no possibility for anyone to do work legally within that with those type of rulers. So that was an attraction at that time. That yes, that it may be necessary to do that, but that did not advance really. Those type of struggles did not advance, and so we were basically on the with that ideology. You can say the Marxist-Leninist ideology or Maoist ideology, but not aligned to any particular group.
and were
That
you
was
personally violent at all?
we were in Bombay, then in Nagpur. We were not involved in any such. Actually, it's a misnomer. They also portrayed that me and Anuradha were spending our time in villages. We spent most of our times in a basti in Nagpur. Everyone knows that in Indora. I don't know how the media has portrayed it that we were working in villages and all that.
But going back to that period,
Yeah,
let me quote again from your book.
yeah,
In a way, you sort of provide the context, if not the rationale, for the government to be suspicious of people like you back then. And this was not the Modi government back then, this was the Congress government, correct?
Congress. Yeah,
And this is what you say in your book, and I quote, at that time, nearly half the country and the bulk of Nepal was being swept by upheaval and insurgencies. And then you go on to list the states that were part of the so-called, what you said, red corridor: West Bengal,
yeah.
Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, Chhattisgarh. Arzan, if you can put up the map again for a second. West Bengal, Bihar, Jharkhand, Orissa, Chhattisgarh, parts of Maharashtra, Andhra Pradesh, Telangana, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, and Kerala. And this huge swath of trouble, according to you, quote, was making the government nervous. Now, it would seem, given the context you've laid out, that the government might have had legitimate reasons to be nervous, even though your own arrest, let's concede, was done irregularly.
Well, the thing is that the government issues were presented by whether it's the Naxalites or the Marxists or many other people before the government. And the government, even in those days, were for the big corporates. It was Manmohan Singh government at that time, and Chidambaram was the home minister. They were this Manmohan Singh was a World Bank man, and introduced the present economic policies, which is also followed by the Modi government just now. So it's this basically representing big corporate interests. And so any form of violence was looked upon with suspicion. And with such a strong movement that was taking place, there was also the Naga movement, there were nationality movements, there was a Kashmir movement, there were other movements also. All these movements made them rather panicky. So there were a swath of arrests in the 2000 and even in that period, in the Manmohan Singh period, 2007, 2010 period, 2011, probably afterwards. I lost touch then. I was in jail. So yes, they were afraid partly because of their policies. After the new neoliberal policies of the 90s was introduced, the plight of labor, the plight of farmers was became terrible. Farmer suicides started in 2002 and went on continuously. Maharashtra was a big center, and now it's reached over 3.5 lakhs. They haven't done a thing for them over all these periods. So also labor. We ourselves in our like the textile mills were here. The Lower Parel in Bombay, Parel, all these areas was the heart of the textile mill. Bombay was seen as a working class city. In the 80s, the entire textile workers were thrown out, 2.5 lakhs, and those who used to pay 20, 30,000 rupees as permanent laborers, now they're getting out since the 84, so 83, 84, since the mills closed down, through power loom centers in Bhiwandi, Chilkanjari, Surat, at virtually slave labor, contract labor. They work 12 hours, hardly 10, 12,000. They sleep 12 to a small little room. It's these conditions. So the conditions of the plight of the people, GDP rates may have grown up. What we only hear about from the economists, mainstream economists, and people like Chetan Bhagat is that GDP rates grew, and the earlier state sectors was acting as a this thing. But as far as those GDP rates, that I'd written an article from jail on this GDP fundamentalism, which I called it, uh, only helped the corporates and the big corporates. They've grown in to huge size, and most of them is crony capitalism, that is by dole from the state or the banks. And we all see the NPA. So that's why the government at that time was very nervous of any sort of activities that threatened their policies. Their policies were quite anti-labor, anti-farmer.
Okay. Um, One or two last questions on this topic before we move on. Just last Sunday, as you know, there was a terrible armed clash between security forces, CPRF, and so-called Maoists in the jungles of the Bastar region. Lots of casualties on both sides. Can you hear me?
Yes,
Yeah,
yes.
okay. Lots of casualties
Yeah.
on both sides. I believe you are familiar with that tribal region which is in the state of Chhattisgarh. Your late wife Anuradha also had worked there for women's rights, as I recall from your book. Just my quick question on that is, what was your immediate reaction when you heard news of this incident?
You see, the since the last 4 years, in fact, the government and the officer have been approaching me for peace talks, and I have been very much for peace talks. As one of the my
I'm sorry, who's
classmates,
been approaching you for peace talks?
the government,
Oh,
the government
um,
people. So
central government.
yeah, yeah, that's aside. It's not in the book,
Oh, yeah,
but
yeah.
the thing is that they actually, even in fact in our WhatsApp group, the person posted a photo of that whole surrender process, which is like thousands of people at least present, and he was a top army general in his times, retired of course. He's my age now, our classmate, and he put it on the WhatsApp. He said this type of support cannot be fought by these means. And I've been promoting the question of, I also feel that because I've been promoting the aspect of peace talks since the last 4 years. I've given concrete these things, but this all marking time. And this clash made it all the more urgent, I felt, that both should come forward. I've already offered I can be an intermediary or whatever it is they want. And they too have said that we can do that. But they're not really concretize anything, and so these casualties keep on increasing.
Who
And I
precisely?
told them also that as far as Basta, I don't know about the rest, all the other places which look more like a mafia type, but here they've done a lot of developmental work, and uh,
Who?
and the
The
government is
Maoists or
also
the
talking, huh?
who has done the developmental work? The Maoists or the?
In Bastar area, yeah.
Okay.
And that's why the people are with them. And the development that they do is probably different from the development the government foresees, but they can talk about it. It's a question of development policy. The government probably wants mining interests out there, they want rural interests to develop. So it's a question of sitting and discussing it across the table. And it's not a question of another nation. They've had peace talks with the Nagas, which talk for a separate country. So why can't they talk here? Which is a question of model of development. So I put that point to them, and they were positive, but nothing has evolved yet.
Now, one very quick follow-up on this. It
Yeah.
seems like it's pretty newsworthy that
Hmm.
someone at the central government level has approached you to be an intermediary with these armed groups up in central India. Two questions. One, and can you tell us who it was or how they approached you, and whether this will lead to, because this is pretty newsworthy. It has not been reported anywhere so far as I know.
Good, and really, I shouldn't mention it, but uh, naturally, who is approached and all these things are questions which I would not like to answer. These are not things that are for public this thing, but I'm presenting this now because things are moving so slowly. So it needs to be brought into the limelight that the process should continue because everyone seems to want it. But for some reason, maybe there's some bottleneck somewhere. Not everyone's likes. There's so many viewpoints, within the government, within the other side. I don't know
Right.
what the factors are.
So let's go back to your being in jail for so long
Yeah.
without trial, eventually to be cleared of the main charge that you were the mastermind of a band group. Uh, that story is quite inspirational. It comes through that way in your book. But there's one aspect that might prevent people from wholeheartedly embracing you, and that you should clear up. And it was this, that the same Delhi judge who threw out the most serious charge of terrorism under the UAPA law did find you guilty of possessing government identification documents that allegedly bore assumed names. How do you explain that?
Actually, the police have a record of planting documents, and our lawyers argued again and again that these were planted documents, but that was not accepted. That is one point. Second point, as far as assumed names, journalists, shell companies in India, that's rampant everywhere. You get that no one ever gets even a 420 charge on them. And but the judge did find that well, did not find those arguments valid. But basically, our lawyers argue that these were planted, and that's a common thing. They plant guns also to implicate you. They didn't do that. So they argued on that point. And in India, in the West, it seem odd that everything is has some duplicate type of thing, fraudulent names. Today, people say you can get 5, 6, I don't know how, Aadhaar cards, for example, in various names. It's common. People do that. And so in India, the having duplicate names, having shell companies, having thousands of companies and various fake names, I mean, it's well known throughout the country. So I don't think that even morally that stands as a point in India. And as far as we went, it was an argument that was placed, which was a factual one, that these were planted.
You spent nearly 7 of those 10 years in the various Indian prisons. Those 7 of those years in Tihar,
Tihar.
which is in
Hmm.
Delhi.
Yeah,
Uh, and a large part of your book is devoted to describing life in that prison.
yeah.
Two questions, and if you can address them briefly. What was the worst aspect of being an inmate in Tihar? And as you describe that, could you also tell us how you befriended certain high profile fellow inmates, uh, including a gentleman named Afzal Guru? Because that aspect I noticed has caught the interest of virtually every Indian interviewer who has spoken to you in
Yeah,
the last couple of weeks.
that's the problem. In fact, the last one that Bloomberg Quint that interviewed me, I said, why this obsession with Abdul Guru? I knew bigger dons like Vijay Singh. People don't know him that well, but he's a, you mention his word and people shiver in Banaras side. Every chai tela wala because he's the biggest probably don in India, and he was a close friend. But no one talks about him at all in all these interviews. But anyway, the question is that the worst aspect of jail I felt was to be in jail and treated as a underdog in the jail as an under trial. In fact, in jail, the convicts get more rights than the under trial. Yet, is the under trial that is not convicted. The the person who's a convict has been convicted. Yet he gets all the leeway and the uh, uh, facilities in jail which under trials don't get. I felt that was the most ridiculous and dehumanizing aspect of these jails. And in fact, I felt that it's ridiculous that people should be out until proved guilty. But it's the opposite. Our jails are full of under trials because of the type of laws that exist. Of course, it varies from state to state, I'm told. Some states are pretty bad. They don't give death penalty. Others do. But it's not even. But that I felt is the worst aspect. As far as the big, you see, in Tihar, we were put in the high risk ward. I was put in the high risk ward. The high risk ward has, well, Naxals, there were no Naxals in Delhi because I was the only person accused of Naxals in the whole Delhi jail. They didn't, in fact, the police had never heard of them earlier. They only knew Islamic terrorists. Then there were the terrorists, Islamists, there were the Kashmiris, and there were the Khalistanis, and there were the big dons. And they also put in a few punishment ones, people like these blade bars, which are who are supposedly punished for their misdemeanors outside in the jail. So these were the people, and we were in a ward. We were 8 cells. A cell can have 3 or 1 person. So if you take an average of 2, that means about 16, 17 people out there. So naturally, you come quite close. And of course, I came in first. Afzal Guru was the first person to meet me, and he was the only person he was not a terrorist. He was more of a knowledgeable person. He was an intellectual. That I've repeated again and again in all these interviews, that he was well read. He had read Noam Chomsky type. He was a Rumi, was a Sufi follower. And his main obsession was with the works of Rumi. He had all the 6 volumes in Urdu. And he was a person I learned a lot from because I knew nothing about Islam or Rumi or Iqbal and all these people. He could recount of, a lot of all these things. As far as the others go, the real actual fundamentalists, you couldn't speak to them even. I mean, they were just, they just wanted to convert you. They just talk to you that try and convert you to Islam. The Khalistanis were also similar like that. They had become quite fundamentalists. So there was no one really to interact with. The Dons, of course, they sort of looked upon people like me, the image that we had in Naxals as a sort of Robin Hood type of people who take from the poor and give, take from the rich and give to the poor. It's not a real picture. They do that to some extent also, I believe. I was told by others. These Dons of UP and Haryana. They're very high profile people with a lot of big political connections. But they were decent people as such. I found them quite decent, and I could interact with them more than I could interact with the Islamists or the Khalistanis, actually. So besides, but that interaction was done from the intellectual type of interaction I could do with Afzal Guru. That was the difference between my interaction with the Dons. But I had good relations with them. As I mentioned, when I left jail, one of the Dons of UP gave me his slippers when he saw my slippers were torn and my sandals were broken. He gave them his Adidas ones to me. So
Yeah.
I had good relations with them as well.
And just to clarify, Afzal Guru was hanged and convicted and hanged as a person involved in the
Parliamentary Act.
separatist attack on Parliament. I forget the
Yeah.
year, but that's the offense he was convicted of.
Yeah, he was, and he was hanged in. I don't know. I also don't remember when he the pal. I think 2001 it was.
That's what it sounds right to
Yeah,
me. Yeah.
yeah, and he was hanged in 2013, and that was done also very secretly, out of turn. Many things were not right in that the way it was done, but it was done.
Let's talk about Anuradha now.
Yeah,
Your late wife comes across not only as the love of your life, but also someone who was a role model.
yeah.
Please read what you have written about her in your book, the excerpt that we discussed earlier.
Yes. Well, actually, the first thing is that I've dedicated the book to her. And in that, I write, this book is dedicated to my late wife, Anuradha, fondly called Anu, in whom I saw all that was good in society. Her commitment to truth and justice. Her idealism could dispel the darkness of a benighted world. Anu's courage of convictions, simplicity, straightforwardness, her intelligence and honesty made her the ideal social activist. That is in the dedication. And then when I go further and say, and when I met Anu, she was a student leader at Elphinstone College and active in the alternative university that was run by some leftist groups on the same subjects that were taught in college. The first time I saw her in class, I saw an extremely bubbly and articulate student raising questions, making points, and being exceedingly communicative. She was an outgoing person and did not have any of the inhibitions that stem from societal constructs. This would trigger anger in her. She could get annoyed, very annoyed, but it would not linger, and she would move on. She never stood on ego or prestige, nor did she hold grudges. She was extremely democratic and had the knack of discussion and interaction with even those who held opposite and different views. Not only was I far more rigid, I was also less knowledgeable uh, than her in varied fields, with mine being restricted to Marxism, caste issues, and at best economics. Her interests were widespread. She was a sociology professor, actually. Also in the organization, while I attracted much animosity from those with whom I differed, not Anu, though she may have had the same feelings as me. She accepted people as they are, as they were. I didn't. She was an extremely lively and friendly, and therefore very open. I tended to be reserved and reticent.
Thank you.
Yeah.
So let's go back to the very beginning stages of your journey through politics and through prison. And I'm quoting you from your book.
Yeah.
Quote, prior to awakening to consciousness, you write, I was totally ignorant of society in general, like any privileged Parsi youth. Although Anu's family had communist leanings and the liberal atmosphere at her home was reflected in a sharp intellect, she too had a carefree childhood and was a typical fun loving college girl. Then you ask a series of questions of yourself. What changed us, and that too so radically? What led us to this line of politics? So, my question to you is what changed you and so radically?
Well, when I was in London, I witnessed racism.
Just to interject,
You
you
know,
were in London to finish the articleship in chartered accountancy,
to do
correct?
my CA, yeah,
Yeah.
to do my CA. After doing my BSc from Xavier's College, I went to London to do the CA 1968. That's right, on my way there. And I was staying at the Indian YMCA, and there I witnessed racism, people being treated badly, Indians being treated badly. I personally did not face any overt racism, but it may have been subtle. And this made me think because, again, as I mentioned out there, we were totally cut off from the world as Parsis, uh, isolated. I didn't know such a thing existed as racism. I didn't know things like when I came to India, I didn't know casteism existed. And so that made me think, what is the cause? And I started reading up on that. I turned to Gandhiism a bit, and but then I didn't find many answers. Then I read all the freedom struggle writers, Dadabhai Nauroji, Ramesh R.C. Dutt, and then I began to understand the nature of colonialism and the British racist policies in India, which colonialism fostered. And that I at that time too, the late 60s, early 70s, the world was in ferment. The communist movements were raging all over the world, and London itself was the center of big rallies against the Vietnam War at that time. And so, and also I found that a lot of communists were fighting, the only people fighting racism, there were some communist groups. And so I started reading up on communism, and it was also linked to the fact that colonialism was linked to the capitalist system itself. And so I studied all those, and the things sort of said that yes, it was communism. The capitalist system has created colonialism, and colonialism has created the racism. And so, if you need to fight against racism, one has to get at the roots of it, and that is only through the communist movement. So that's what brought me to communism. And then, when we were in fact propagating that at a street level meeting in a working class area, we were. That's the time I actually faced racism. I was physically attacked by skinheads, and then the police arrested three of us. The other two were whites. I was the only Indian, and I was taken separately by the cops, beaten up amidst racist abuse. Well, anyway, by then I'd already decided that CA is not my profession, and that sealed it. So I then gave it up and waited for the case, and when it came back.
So actually, I just want to note here that you did spend 3 months in a British jail
Yeah,
before you ever saw the
I
inside
did.
of an Indian jail, correct?
Yeah, that's my only other arrest actually, but it wasn't 3 months actually. What happened was at the court, the judge also was of a similar type. That time we were fired youth, so, and the court, I made a political statement. I didn't just say that this thing. I said that you people have destroyed my country, and now you treat us like dogs, and we will not take this. We are no longer your slaves any longer. We will not take this any longer. That chap was furious. He said, a dangerous fellow, lock him up immediately. And he sentenced us to 3 months, but there you have to face 2/3 of the sentence. So I was released in 2 months.
Okay. So what was your parents' reaction when you came back from London, or even from London perhaps, told them you were
Yeah,
giving up on chartered accountancy and essentially taking a vow of poverty as a social activist?
yeah.
Team school is not cheap. I checked its current tuition. It's $13,000 a year.
Which one? Dune School.
13,000, the equivalent of $13,000 a year, which I
Yes.
suspect very few Indians can afford.
Yeah, yeah,
Anyway, along with the London trip, they had invested a lot of money and a lot of hopes in you, I'm sure.
yeah.
And surely they might not have been initially pleased with your decision. And if I can perhaps slip into some Parsi Gujarati right now, I would assume they said something like, "Are gaado thai gyo ke Kobad, chartered accountancy pelle kar, paisa kama, ne pachi social work kar." Did you hear something
Yeah.
along those lines?
Actually, my father was a particularly democratic and liberal.
I see.
Through all this process of change, we exchanged a lot of letters, and he had the same views, countered, and we argued the points. And finally, surprisingly, in the course of this correspondence, he came over to my views, and he said, "What you're doing is right." In fact, finally, when I was arrested and things like that, he was also shocked at the way the police behaved, and he was not in any way. He did not in fact, right till the end, till his death, actually, he supported me in every possible way, even after I returned. And he had read, then he started reading our literature also, Marxist literature and all that, and he veered towards Marxism also in his own way as a intellectually. And of course, by then he had retired from Glaxo and he had settled in Mahabaleshwar. We would go there very often after I came back, and we spent a lot of time out there with him. And he was very supportive of us throughout, even after, once he was convinced that what I was doing was just and right. He not only did not oppose, he in fact supported us in all this, both Anu and myself.
And your
Of
mother?
course, Anu's parents also supported us, but they were communists anyway earlier.
Right, right. How about your mother?
She too, she also came along. She was not as so pro-family, but she also, like when both of us got married and said we won't have children, my mother said, "We have one child at least. I'll look after her or him, whoever, whatever it is." So she was like that also. She was, in a way, sympathetic. Not, she
So,
may
so
not have
you,
read all that stuff that my
right,
father
right.
read.
So you come back and
But she died young. She died soon also. She
oh, I'm
died
sorry.
very soon. She got a heart attack and died in 84, 85 or something.
I see.
Yeah.
Um, let's take you now to that worldly slum where you sort of began your activism career, Mayanagar.
Yeah.
And just briefly, because we are running out of time a little bit here, could you tell us what you did there? In fact, what was it that you did on the first day that you walked over from your seafront home
Valley
and
City. Yeah.
sea-facing home and walked into this slum?
Actually, I went there just now. During the week had taken an interview. So in preparation for that, I just went there after 40 years. And all of them were very warm. The old people were with me, the youth were with me, now all retired from jobs or something like that. And they all said that, oh, we all remember you, where have you been, and all that stuff. And of course, they didn't know me very well. And when I went there, actually, I can't remember because I did not really have any knowledge, even proper knowledge of Hindi, let alone for communication. And these were Marathi speaking people. And anyway, probably I just went and sort of learned and picked it up and stayed with them and ate with them. What I did get lifelong from that slum was amoebic dysentery, a weak stomach after that. But besides that, that really gave me a lot of. We tried to organize them. There were very bad conditions in those days. No water facilities, no electricity, no latrine properly or drainage system. So we started organizing for them for that, and we did get some results to start with, water and all that, some minimum thing. Then that Dalit Panther movement broke out. So all these people, they were all from that Dalit community. That's when I realized they were Dalit. Actually, I didn't know what caste was still there.
Right. So
And then I read up on that.
picking up on the caste
Yeah,
aspect again, very briefly. Uh,
yeah,
you sort of talk about how caste is at the root of a lot of these social and economic inequities in India rather than class, and how you couldn't persuade your fellow communists or many of them
yeah.
to agree with you on that. But my question to you is different. Why is a Parsi out there trying to reform Hindu society? There are enough problems that we have closer to home, would you say? And in a country like India, where distinct groups like Hindus, Muslims, Parsis, Buddhists, etc., exist, uh, what gives you the license or the confidence to try to reform something in a different community?
Actually, I didn't consider myself as community. After I came to communism, I actually considered myself an atheist and not belonging to any religion. And I felt that neither was a religion. All religions at least treat their own people as equals. But here, the caste factors, I mean, the untouchables, so called untouchables, are treated inhumanly. And I felt that even as the Marxists who have taken things from this thing, Russia, China, all these type of things, they sort of took it mechanically and they didn't see the aspect of the Indian society, the Indian social system. As a person, I was not working as a Parsi in now any longer in the communist movement. I was working as a Marxist in in the movement or in society, and my approach was to change society, make a better society, a more humane society, a more just society. So I felt that this aspect needed to be saying as a separate aspect. Class is there. Workers and peasants being exploited by the landlords or uh, industrialists. But this is another aspect of where I felt that without eradication of caste, there cannot be any democratization. The democracy in India will only be superficial because each caste considers themselves higher in the hierarchy and considers someone lower. So as long as that approach exists, there can be no democracy. And the untouchables are treated inhumanly, worse than the blacks in America or any.
So, Kobad,
Yeah.
in prison, you also rediscovered your own, despite your atheism, you rediscovered, you say, your own cultural and religious roots. drawing inspiration from a new interpretation of the Gathas, uh, whose, I mean, the title of the book is The Inner Fire. In fact, I have a copy here. Oops, am
Yeah,
I showing it correctly? Yeah.
yeah, that's right. Yes.
And you got this book by happen chance. A lawyer slipped it to you as you were being taken away for to another jail. The author, by the way, is Rohinton Nariman, who is a justice of the Indian Supreme Court and also an ordained priest. So my question is, what did you discover in that book? I know you did a positive review of it from prison, review of this book for Parsi-Zoroastrian magazine. You, however, keep saying you're an atheist. Why does this book on a spiritual interpretation appeal to you so much? What did you gain from it?
Well, actually, at that time, his father, Ali Nariman, was doing my case in the Supreme Court. And it so happened that this book was being just released that time. And I happened to be in Hyderabad jail at that time. And he passed it on through the Andhra lawyer to give to me. Of course, it took me a year before I got it finally. Time I was released for 3 days and just before rearrest. And I just took it with me to Jharkhand jail. I was then taken there. I had nothing else to read, actually. That was the only book I had. And I was shocked to see the points mentioned in the Gathas and elaborated in this book, in his translation, were very similar to what we have been propounding as Marxists. That's the question of evil and good, righteous and the evil, the struggle between the two. The points that I've written also in my review out there is that, and I felt also as an by then, is that to call myself an atheist also is wrong. We should take, I felt we should take everything that is positive from religion, from any source, Ambedkar's writings, from Marxist writings, anywhere where there's a positive uh, thoughts presented, one should accept and try and bring it into our practice, into our lives. And I found that in the Gathas. I found the question of, they talk about freedom, they talk about happiness. Let me just quote the one quote that I, I have put in the book from the Gathas, not taken from Palin Nariman. It talks of freedom, it talks of values, the same points, and they also talk of happiness in another point where I mentioned. With an open mind, seek and listen to all the ideals. Consider the most enlightened thoughts. Then choose your path, person by person, each for oneself. This is all what we talk about freedom actually. Then turn yourself not away from the three best things: good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. Actually, in my third section of the book, Fractured Freedom, I feel that communism has lacked three aspects. One is that the targets should be happiness and not just equality. And that will solve a lot of the problems that socialism has faced in being more humane. Economically, I feel that's the most viable system, but otherwise, there are many lacunas. So I feel that the question of happiness is there, mentioned in the Gathas also. The question of freedom, this stanza that I laid out, the first part talks really about freedom. Because when I also deal with freedom, like in here mentioned, I start from the individual, not the system, not the government, not that. A person should be free himself and democratic in his behavior with others. And that is what this stanza put. And the last two lines of good words, good thoughts, good deeds is what I talk about the value system, which I put as a model my late wife Anuradha, as having all those values of good thoughts, good words, and good deeds. I put it in other words, saying she was straightforward, natural, humane, all those things, and liberal, that type of thing. So all those aspects which I have put in my third section that into our project for radical change is there in these gathas, in this, at least in what Rohinton Nariman has brought out in them. And I was really very impressed by it, so much so that in that Tenuga jail, I had a real problem because it was Tenuga. I had never heard of the place, though the case is there. So I don't expect you to hear to it. It's a small place in Jharkhand. It's a small sub jail. And that's the book I had with me. So then I started reading it, and then I wrote it. Then I said I must get it out and send it to Parsi-Ana, and so one had to smuggle it out. I had help from people in there who helped write it. One person knew English, so he copied it two, three times. This what I had written, so that I could keep copies of it also. And it was a lot of effort, but it was really well worth it because it reached Parsi and it was printed. And it
So
really, I was really impressed.
one last question from me before we open up to the
Yeah.
audience. Uh, Back in 1990, V.S. Naipaul published his book, India, A Million Mutinies Now. Uh, it was a documentary book, not a novel. And I was struck by one character that he interviewed, a Calcutta native named Dipanjan, who was a former Naxalite Marxist, had actually participated in armed uh, confrontations with
Yeah.
local authorities.
Mm.
Uh, his story, generally speaking, other than the armed confrontation part, seems to kind of almost parallel yours. But
Yes.
after all that, and he had a wife. He unlike you had two. He did have two daughters, by the way, two children.
Mm.
And this is what he concludes because he was disillusioned with his life as a communist. He found many flaws in that philosophy, etc. And he sort of says, and I quote from the book: the major mistake, the basic misunderstanding of the Marxist position. And then he pauses. He says, I feel the people must liberate themselves, that the intellectuals can give them tools, but the people must liberate themselves. Would you agree?
Well, I don't think the intellectuals are divorced from the people. They are part of the people. The question is that the intellectuals should be integrate with the people and not stay as intellectuals aloof from them. That is the problem. So probably he is referring to that. But intellectuals and people, I don't think are demarcated, and one need not bring a division between intellect. Intellectuals are people after all. They are they are not demons or some such thing. So yes, in a country like India where there's a superiority of caste and most of the intellectuals are upper caste, well, that does bring up problems sometimes in the question of this integration. But integration, if you do, and uh, what what is that? Paulo Freire and others talk about the basic masses becoming the also intellectual and you raising their levels. That has to be done, and historically, everywhere it's the intellectuals that have taken the initiative. So I don't think you can create that fissure between people and intellectuals, which you've done. I wouldn't agree with that.
Thank you. At this point, Arzan,
Yeah.
I'd like you to
Thank
take over and see if there's some questions that caught your eye.
Sure.
I was not paying
Sure.
close
So I think
attention.
the chat line has been kind of pretty busy with questions, and I will start from the first one. And I'm going to try to paraphrase these questions. Some of them are like more than a paragraph long. So the first one is from Kushu Bagli in Toronto. Kushu studied at the IIT Kharagpur in the early 70s. And he says that during his stay in Kharagpur, he witnessed firsthand the terror and the indiscriminate murder perpetuated by Naxalites slash Maoists. Um, and he wants to understand what's Kobad's take on this. Is it now time to say mea culpa, or was there something that was valid at that time that he would have liked something to happen differently?
Act- Actually, I don't know much about this. This is all the Bengal side and things like that. And I think many flaws were there. The youth tend to be very uh, excitative and take things into their own hands, and many such flaws did occur. Yes, but I know only from the nothing more than that.
So then the next question is from Sunita Sorabji. Sunita is a good friend and a journalist with India West, which is a leading Indian publication in the US. And she's also on the chat. She's asking, on what concrete charges were you imprisoned, and why were you finally released? Is there still a court case against you?
Well, yes, that's about 10 cases. But the thing is that the main charge everywhere was just the same. Section 20 of the UAPA Act, that is, being a member of a banned party. That's the Maoist party. Now, I was acquitted of that charge in Delhi, but that doesn't automatically mean you're acquitted elsewhere. Everywhere I had to go through the case. The same thing came in Telangana, the cases, they had the same charge. They had the same charge in Punjab, the Patiala case. They had the same charge in uh, everywhere. The same charge has been put, and everywhere you have to sit and prove yourself. Like, and it's not that in they say one nation, one law, one nation, one tax, one nation, one this thing. But as far as I go, the one nation, one law didn't apply, because if I'm acquitted of the UAPA charge, Section 20, in one place, it should automatically apply everywhere, but it didn't. I had to spend years and years fighting those cases elsewhere. And still in Vishakhapatnam, there's a case again has that clause. In Jharkhand, the case where I've got bail. Rest of the places have been the cases have been thrown out, like in Patiala, in Telangana, and in Delhi. But these places I got bail. I had bail, and it was taking too long to be in jail, so I took the bail and came out. Again, there's UAPA there, Section 20. Same thing in Jharkhand. There also I got bail. So the cases are still going on, but with COVID, all the courts are frozen out here. So they are at the last stage, and I'm hoping that it gets over soon, these cases. But there are those cases.
Okay. Then the next one was from Jimmy Kumana in Houston. He's asking, what about a public relations program through the national press? I'm guessing he's alluding to, to the fact that, there are Naxalite activities that are controlled and disseminated by the media with a certain bias.
Yeah, the media's today, it is very biased. But how does one do a program at the level of the media? I mean, even this aspect that everyone agrees now that there's need for peace, so that developmental work can take place peacefully in these areas. But so the government does. I believe the Maoists have also put forward a proposal, but it's nothing is happening at the ground level. That is the problem, and the media does not promote this type of uh, thinking. It's a very small section of the media where you'll get reports. Some people send it. I get the reports, but in some small press news, but not the mainline media, that these proposals are taking place. These efforts are also taking place at the ground level. There was a march the other day from in the Chhattisgarh area by some liberals and others and local people for peace. And someone conducted a survey also out there, where they said that 80% of the people in that locality were for peace. So that needs to be taken up by the national media, these efforts that are taking place at the ground level, but they are not the main news item for any of these big papers.
The next question is from Kersi Shroff from the Washington, D.C. area. Kersi says that he's looking forward to reading Kobad's book. And can Kobad tell us about the support or the lack thereof by the Parsi community of India in challenging his long and perhaps illegal detention?
No, I mean, I was really astounded when I was inside. I didn't realize the extent of support that the Parsi community was giving. Particularly, there was Parsi Anna, which was quite supportive from the very beginning, it seemed. And when I came out, large sections of the Parsi community I found. In fact, most of my personal sales of the book has been to Parsis only out here. And they've been taking more and more books. And so, and it was Fali Nariman himself who offered to take up my case at the Supreme Court level. So there was, to some extent, a support. There is a section, of course, which is quite hostile, I believe. I don't come across them, but there's a larger section, I think, that have been very supportive, if not indirectly helping or anything, but at the moral level, there has been that support coming, and quite wide it is.
The
I
next,
wouldn't have expected anything more, actually. They did. And that moral support is what is most important, I feel. What they could do or couldn't do is another matter.
the next question is from Vistas, and Vistas says that for the last few years, Kobad, the government did everything possible to embroil you in case after case and keep you behind bars. It still seems to me a surprise and no small relief that your travails have come to an end at long last. What I want to know is, do you really think that these nightmares have finally ended? Do you think that they can come after you again by cooking up any more charges?
Well, the present atmosphere is not very conducive for any, but basically, I'm not really doing any groundwork at all. And I've just tried to analyze what experience that so many years of activism has given me, positive aspects, and trying to so that new generations do a better job than we did. And I don't think that really, I'm not really, uh, they get more disturbed if you oppose some government or do something and all that. I'm not getting into politics, nor am I getting into any of the present debates on the present situation at all. Because I feel it's the system, and it's the system that is basically at uh, fault. And individuals just play a role in the whole structure that exists. So I don't blame parties or individuals. So I don't feel that there should be much threat, but one can't say.
Okay, then the next question is from Vish. Can you speak a little bit more about your thoughts on the intersection of socialism and Zoroastrian values and how you reconcile the two? Would tolerating and possibly benefiting from this type of inequality you sought to address in your time as an activist have been consistent with your faith?
Actually, as I said, I did not know much about the faith earlier. In fact, my main introduction has been by Rohington Nariman's book, The Inner Fire. And what I saw was very good. And I felt that when I was reviewing our past activities, I felt that these aspects of happiness, freedom, and a value system needs to be incorporated in the project of change. And exactly those things represented in his book by the in the Gathas. I've quoted them specifically in my uh, review in Parsi-Ana, those very stanzas from the Gathas. I've quoted that, which completely match with which are Marxist thinking, in fact. And because it introduces the question of values and the question of freedom and the question of happiness, which was not really there as part of our project as a Marxist earlier. I felt that, and I feel that these need to be introduced. Well, there's that meeting point, definitely.
Sure. Manik Bhujwala from LA asks, is there any chance of getting restitution for being in jail without conviction?
No, there's nothing. So there are many people who do this,
Okay.
face this. So some people who have spent 15 years and been acquitted of everything, and there's no compensation.
Okay. Javed from UK asks, if you were to look at your life with the benefit of hindsight, on your return from the UK, do you think going down the Marxism route was your best way for achieving social change in India? Could you have gone down another path?
No, I still feel that that is the most effective path, and maybe a different variant of it, but definitely that. But now, in hindsight, I can say a different variant. If I hadn't participated, I would not be able to say that today. And if I had not fully participated, my ideas would also be half baked and not so authoritative at all. But because I was able to, I gave everything. I and Anuradha gave everything for the work that we were doing. I can see how spectacular it is. And so I felt that was the best path. There were many shortcomings in it, but those I treat them all as part of experience and not as something to cry over or be this thing about.
Okay. The next question is from our dear friend Narges Kakalia from New Jersey. Mr. Gandhi, you are an inspiration. How did you sustain your energy and faith in social justice despite all the awfulness of jail without conviction, unjustified separation from your loved ones, etc., etc.?
Well, I don't know, but in jail particularly, many times I reached a breaking point, and because it seemed to just drag on and on and on, and there seemed no end to it. But I would try and come out thinking of the lives of others who have fought for India's freedom. And I did try and lead a more disciplined life in jail. Like I had a very fixed routine of morning yoga and exercises, then studying of the papers and the magazines. That there was never a stop to that. Magazines and papers, then writing articles. I fortunately had an outlet, this mainstream weekly, printed all the articles that I wrote. I wrote a lot on Indian economy, which is my main theme, Indian economy, and on the world economy also, world situation. A lot of analysis I did. That type of things, both at the intellectual that sustained me level, mentally, and at the physical level, though I was aged and had many health issues, because of my yoga and exercise, and uh, I was able to somehow sustain the health. And it's true that what Boris had earlier read out from that book of the person who was in armed struggle or something, who in the hundred, was it mutinies?
Right, right.
That book.
A million
So,
mutinies. Yeah.
yeah, a million mutinies. It's a fact that a lot of people especially from intellectual backgrounds, do get disillusioned this thing. But I felt that I lost my wife in the course of all this. She was one of the most dedicated people. The least I could do is to stand up for what she uh, stood up for and died for. And that has also helped push me, keep me sane and continue in this way with trying to recognize our faults also,
Sure.
both these
Uh,
things.
the next question is from Charmeen Mary from Mr. Gandhi. What are some core Marxist authors or texts that ground your activism work?
Actually, in jail, I went back to the oldest ones. Of course, the real Marxist basis is more scientific analysis of capitalism is Das Capital, but it's such a difficult book for anyone to go through. A book, there are 4 volumes. It's very difficult to go through. But in jail, I went back to the earlier writings of Marx and Engels, which were the more philosophical writings, which I've brought into the third section of this book on question of happiness, on the question of alienation, on the question of understanding society in a more humane way and changing oneself also, not only changing society, but changing oneself. It's all there in the earlier writings of Marx. That I felt was more this thing. Of course, the rest of the stuff is there as far as economics goes. It's basically an economic project to switch from capitalism to socialism. And Marx is the most scientific, in-depth analysis, though it was written at a time of the onset of capitalism from a feudal system. Yet it had that insight. And in fact, during the 2008 financial crisis, we read, at least in jail, and even otherwise, I read that people were again referring to Marx to understand the basis of the crisis. So it does give insights into the economic system, and it helps us understand the world in the inner workings of the whole system of the world that exists. And but the earlier writings I found more impressive as far as philosophical and human questions go.
The next question is from your schoolmate Adel Davar from New Jersey. Adel says that it is said that the Battle of Waterloo was won on the playing fields of Eton. As your Doon School classmate, how did your education at the Doon School prepare you or not prepare you for the ultimate ordeal in prison?
Well, one thing is there. For our senior Cambridge, we studied Animal Farm, George Orwell's book on against communism. And that was the only concept I had of communism. What we were taught in Animal Farm, Snowball and Napoleon and all those things that they come to power and oppress others. That was my knowledge of communism that I got from school, you say. But Doon School with its balanced educational system on sports, and they didn't teach us to cram, didn't teach us to just repeat by rote. It taught us to think, and that was really very beneficial to me. It taught us because I never excelled either at studies or at sports. Though I played all the sports, I was involved in studies mediocre in both basically. But it gave one the tools to think and face the world, which I believe our education doesn't do mostly. I don't know about do now, but at that time it did do that. Though it was elitist, no doubt it was elitist, but it did give this aspect of ability to think. And that's why when I did come to this uh, ideology also, I was always debating and thinking, whether it was the caste question with the Marxists, I was raising questions which people really didn't like. And even now in this book, I've raised questions. I don't know how much the left is going to like it. But but the aspect of being able to think for oneself and review something really came from the type of education we got there. It was very positive.
So I see that there are a bunch of questions and we may run short of time. So I'm going to prioritize the ones that haven't been addressed at all, and then kind of, go back to the other ones when we have time. There's a question from Michiko that says, are you optimistic that life will get better for the poor farmers in the future through activities such as yours and others?
Well, I don't think the things look very bright just now, let alone my activities. But the farmers' movement is going on now. It's in its 135th day, and they're sustaining. And but they have faced a condition. I mean, it's not just the present government. It's not just the three laws. It's right from the beginning. The rural sector has been neglected totally, and there are many things one can say about that. But so it'll be an uphill task. So I'm not that optimistic in the immediate. The long term, maybe.
Then there's a question, similar questions posed by both Dali Dastur and Maruk and Firdosh Mehta. I'll combine those two questions. While you were in jail, were you able to get news from outside? And then the other one is, how did you pay for your legal support? Where did you get the financing to fight the government in the courts for lawyers, payments, court fees, etc.?
Well, as far as on that, there was never any restriction. Fortunately, newspapers were allowed in all. I mean, I was mostly in Tihar, but other jails, of course, also allowed it. But Tihar also allowed any newspaper to get them. We could pay for them, and and get it. And magazines, sometimes they were allowed, sometimes not allowed. But if they were posted, they were allowed. Books were first allowed, then they were stopped. I mean, everything. But I did get a lot, especially for my earlier writing. I got a lot of material, and I would make copious notes from everything that I got, the newspapers, the magazines, and that was sufficient for my uh, reasonably analytical articles in mainstream, which I got. As far as the costs go, costs were not actually, most of the lawyers that stood did it pro bono, and no one ever. I mean, they saw that we were social activists, they didn't charge, so the costs were low, and whatever little money that was there, which I had, most of it was given in the movement. Some remained. That was used for these expenses. So, but the type of cost, if they charge, the lawyers charge. I mean, top lawyers like Rebecca John and all charge huge fees. Even the Patiala, the lawyer, uh, Sodhi, yeah, he's the top lawyer of Patiala. They would have charged a lot, but they all did it pro bono. This is very good-hearted. I mean, lots all over, Andhra, everywhere, wherever I went. So that cost was very much low, and I had to pay for. You can imagine Fali Nariman stood also in the Supreme Court. Prashant Bhushan was to stand also on some of the cases. They all did it pro bono, so there was no basically cost.
Then there's another question from Firdos Dabar. Could you please share your thoughts, if possible, on how the behavior of the leaders in George Orwell's Animal Farm seem to be seen over and over again in history? Anything you feel could be done to change that and the societal damage that it causes?
In fact, one section one part of the third section in my book deals precisely with that, the corrupting effect of money and power. And that is what basically animal farm power corrupts, and absolute power corrupts absolutely, they say. But so I've tried to deal with that. I said we cannot do away with money and power. Those are necessary uh, for a long period of time. But how can we minimize their negative effects? They'll, I've woven into this aspects of happiness, freedom, and a new value system as being the only sort of this any project of change. I said that should have these aspects woven into it, and if that is there, there's be some checks by the people in the groups or in the circles in which they operate, where this is given importance. Otherwise, it's never given importance. This question of money and things like that. So, if these three aspects are introduced into the project of change in a live and living way, one can, in a way, try and prevent the what happens in and far more happens everywhere. It's happening everywhere in the present society, also in the communist society. Power is really power and money both tend to corrupt a person. And this Shakespeare, I've quoted from Shakespeare also in my book. Right from the old times, people have spoken about this and of money corrupting and power corrupting. But there's no shortcut. There's no organizational. I don't think people have given many organizational answers to try and stop all this. There's no organization. It must come from within us, and the change must come from within us, and that comes in those three projects of happiness, freedom, and a new value system, the Anuradha model, which I say.
So then the next question is from my friend Roozbeh Hodiwala, who's currently in the UK, and he has a comment and a question. Roozbeh says that he's not exaggerating, but finally seeing you speak on a live platform is giving him goosebumps. It is so heartwarming to have you back, Mr. Gandhi, and I think there he speaks for all of us. And he has a follow-up
Thank you.
question, which says that the UAPA was, the law was basically set up by the Congress government, but it is also being, used by the current government. And what do you have any thoughts about the misuse of the UAPA to silence dissenting voices?
Yes, UAPA should, I mean, that law should be completely in a democracy at no place, nor the sedition law. Sedition law was drafted by Macaulay during British time for colonial rule. And it's still neither the Nehru government nor the Congress nor the present government, no one changed that sedition law. In fact, they brought in this UAPA and anti-terror laws. First it was FEZANA, then POTA, and now this UAPA. These are all draconian laws, which has no place in a democracy and is basically used against the poor. They say it's against the terrorists and Islamists and all that. But I don't see any Islamists having much influence in our country, just at least now. And the few incidences that did take place, maybe with the help of Pakistan or people out there, but not really. It's mostly being used against the poor. And this first it was one, I think it was TADA first, then POTA, or the other way around, and now UAPA. Those were scrapped because they were anti-democratic. I think the Supreme Court or someone passed laws against it. But then they brought in the UAPA, which is nothing but a milder version, but it's being more abused than POTA and TADA and more widely used now, particularly against human rights and civil liberties workers also, which was not the case earlier.
If I can interject
So
here,
they have no place in a democracy. Yeah.
there was a parliamentary response from maybe the Home Ministry or something a while back, based on a survey of UAPA cases that were adjudicated between 2016 and 2019,
Hmm.
and eventually only 2.2% of the individuals charged were actually convicted by judges.
That's the trouble with this POTA, TADA, and UAPA. You don't get
But
bail,
yeah, there people
but
remain
you
in
stay in
prison for
jail for so
extended
long.
periods.
Yeah, that's what happened with me also. 10 years, go acquitted.
So then the next question is, is a little more personal, coming from Zareen Karania Rose. She says that, Your wife must have felt so respected and loved by you. What do you think she would want you to do with your life now? And what is your own current goal?
See, I think we were both of us very committed to what we were doing, and I can't say for her because she was very independent in her thinking, and I was independent, and sometimes we would fight like mad on the views. So that's so I really cannot say what exactly she would thought because she was a really independent thinking person. But I'm sure she would support basically what my major role is. Basic approach today is that I have about 40 to 50 years of experience, negative and positive, is to try and conceptualize those things and put it down. I've tried to do that in the third section of this book. I tend to further study aspects of that and elaborate on those aspects so that future generations can do a better job than us. Basically, that's my aim.
So then,
That's
Roy,
also
sorry.
there's also I have an aim to. I'm basically an economist. Have written a lot on economy. I hope to analyze the present economic crisis, which I feel is maybe deeper than the 1929 crash, the post 1929 crash. They've sort of uh, cushioned the crash with quantitative easing and low interest rates, but within that and high, huge debt. But I feel that that is going to explode one time. So I hope to be able to analyze that and its relation with COVID and other things.
And so then a follow up on that is from my friend Rayaman Patel from Bombay. Was it the love for Anu that helped you walk away from it all?
Walk away from what? Meaning?
Um,
I didn't
Rayaman,
understand.
Rayaman, do you want to elaborate? Let me unmute you.
Uh, Walk away from a privileged background is what he's
Yeah,
asking.
I,
Oh, I see. No, no. That we decided jointly. I don't think it was linked to the love for her. Love was there, but we were basically both working in the same direction, and we both felt that we need to uh, take the steps necessary for what we claim we are doing, and not do it half-heartedly. And she was as thorough in whatever she took up, and I also that way. And generally, we were more honest to ourselves, so that pushed us in the direction we did. That was the main thing. It was, and since we were both like a team, it made it easier also because very often, even in left circles, these interpersonal relations, there are a lot of crises people face. I've seen it amongst others. Either it acts as a dampener and they go back, the children and this and that and all that type of stuff, or it's very often it breaks up also, relationships break up. So none of that happened with us because basically we were at the same wavelength, I suppose, and we had that respect for each other.
so I'll take so now the last question, and then we'll go with concluding remarks from both of you, so Porus can wrap up. The last question is from Khorshid. She says, Mr. Gandhi, you portray a calmness in spite of your experiences. Do you hold anger and resentment against the authorities responsible for your aberrant treatment? Do you now work towards helping others who may be in a similar situation like you?
Actually, I don't have really any anger against those people. I realize they are also part of the system, victims of the system, and I see them as that. Some may be worse than others, some may be a little better. For example, in my book, I've also actually, except for Delhi, in fact, I said that everywhere I found excellent superintendents of jail, excellent police officers who were very uh, warm and sort of respectful. So basically, I seeing that the individual is not to blame, it's basically the system, and so I don't hold it against anyone uh, personally. And as far as helping others, I don't think I have that capacity just now, and I think my time can be more usefully put to analyzing my experience and help coming out with a better project for which may be more helpful for the coming generation, and the new generation, the younger people, can maybe do a better job. And in that, I hope to also analyze what is really going on in the world and what it entails also, world and India.
Okay, so now Porus, you want to do the concluding remarks?
Yes.
I just have a few words, mainly to thank, first of all, everyone on this program and all the wonderful questions that came through. Thank you to Kobad for making time and talking to us. Thank you, Arzan. One last thought, though, a political thought, if I may, for Kobad. The more I think about it, I'm not so sure Mao Zedong is an inspirational figure for Indians for all kinds of reasons, even if some parts of his philosophy might be something that you might say would benefit the poorest and so on. Given the state of suspicion, first of all, national suspicion between India and China, given that Mao was kind of at some point rejected by even his own political descendants in China itself, though he's making a bit of a comeback reputationally speaking. You could have done, couldn't you have done all of the things you did without putting the Mao label on it?
The thing is that as a Marxist, we were Marxists, and at that time, and it was the Marxists or the Maoists who were really working with the poor. Both in London, I found it was those groups that were fighting against racism. So I veered towards them. And in India also, the various forms of, as we say, Naxalites were, communists were really sold out, uh, at least the CPM, when they were in government, and they were, in fact, used terror methods. So I've seen that when people come to power, that happens. But now I do feel that seeing that it's that we should get all the type of Marxists, Marx, Lenin, Mao, all these things one should read, but one should also read a lot for in the Indian context, Ambedkar and Phule and other people who have written on the Indian social conditions. Why even religious concepts like Zoroastrianism and things like that take concepts and evolve a ideology, a philosophy, and a practice which is more encompassing and more wide. I feel that now, certainly. And to some extent, I do feel we were quite rigid in those days with this Marxist and Maoist limited to that thinking. And yes, we must take from that. I do feel that is the most scientific. Marxism is the most scientific analysis of the present system still. And but we have much more to learn. For example, particularly I felt that in my third section, while dealing with happiness, freedom, and this thing, I need to study Freud and psychology. That is also another sphere which is very necessary. And in that, there are these spiritual uh, people, a lot of spiritual this thing which work on our inner change. Those also need to be studied because finally, inner change is also as important as outside change, and that Marxists have tend to neglect. And so things have reversed with power. The snowball Napoleon effect of animal farm tends to come in. So we need to really give more attention to the inner change as well as the outer change. I feel that given the experience around the world, given the experiences in India, again, I wouldn't like to blame any individual, whether it's a Mao or whether it's a Jyoti Basu or it's anyone. It's the system and it's the ideology, which is the thoughts that are there that are important. And certainly, we have to think of the latest discoveries, particularly in psychology, for inner change.
Thank you. Thank
Yeah.
you. Arzan, it's back to you.
Okay, so with that, Kobad, thank you very much for giving of your time to this large audience. The comment sections are glowing with everybody thanking you for speaking your mind, and we all get an opportunity to hear and see the real you after years of seeing you just in news and media. And thank you, Porus, for doing this, bringing this opportunity to Fezana to present Kobad to the larger audience. Our next Fizana talk will be on Zoroastrians in the armed forces. This will be in a couple of or 3 weeks from now, where we will invite 3 or 4 young Zoroastrians who serve in the armed forces in the US and Canada to talk about why they do that and what it means to serve in the line of duty, to the country. So look out for that announcement very soon. And thank you very much, all of you. You've been a great audience, and have a good rest of the weekend, and see you soon on a Fizana talk.
Okay, let me also thank you all. Thank everyone, Rizana and Porus, for organizing this. It's been a real pleasure. The questions were also really very good, and I hope to benefit myself also from this. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Bye
Okay,
bye, everybody.
thanks. Bye.